I still remember the exact tone my sister used when she said it. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was worse. It was casual. We were standing in my mother's kitchen in Columbus, Ohio. The air smelled like burnt garlic bread, and the dishwasher hummed behind us. My sister, Lauren, leaned against the marble counter like she owned the house, like she owned the air in the room. "So," she said, sipping her wine, not even looking at me, "are you still figuring things out?" Figuring things out. That's what she called the 5 years I'd spent building my company from a folding table in a one-bedroom apartment. Before I could answer, she added just loud enough for my mom and her fiancé to hear. "I mean, it's okay. Not everyone has the drive to succeed." My mother didn't say anything. She just gave me that tight smile, the one that meant, "Please don't make this awkward." I swallowed. "I'm doing fine." Lauren finally looked at me then, her eyes scanning my Target sweater, my scuffed boots. "Sure," she said, "if you say so." That was the night I realized something. My sister didn't just think I had failed, she needed everyone else to think it too. Lauren had always been the golden one. Perfect GPA, cheer captain, corporate job by 23. She worked for a tech logistics company downtown, sleek glass building, rooftop bar, catered lunches. I dropped out of grad school at 25, not because I couldn't handle it, because I saw something better. I saw a gap in the market for small, women-owned product brands that didn't have the budget for big agencies. I started a branding and digital strategy firm out of nothing. No investors, no connections, just cold emails and YouTube tutorials at 2 a.m. The first year, I made $14,200. The second year, $38,000. The third year, things started to shift. But Lauren never asked numbers. She never asked what I actually did. She just told people I was freelancing. At Thanksgiving, she announced it to our cousins like she was giving a charity update. "Emma's still doing her little online projects," she said, smiling. Cute. I wanted to scream. Instead, I carved the turkey. The worst part wasn't the words, it was the way people believed her. Because she had the title, because she had the corner office, because she wore blazers that probably cost more than my rent. Perception is everything in America, and Lauren controlled the narrative. By year 4, my company, Larkin Vale, had 8 contractors. We were rebranding boutique skincare lines, fitness apps, indie coffee chains in 3 states. I was pulling in more than Lauren's corporate salary, but I never told my family. Part of me wanted to surprise them. Part of me wanted to see how far she'd go. The breaking point came at our dad's 60th birthday dinner. We rented a private room at a steakhouse downtown. Crystal glasses, dim lights, everyone dressed like it was a wedding. Lauren stood up to give a toast. "To Dad," she said, raising her champagne, "for teaching us hard work and ambition, and for showing us what success looks like." Her eyes flicked to me. "And for reminding us that sometimes, if you don't apply yourself, life doesn't exactly go as planned." There it was. The room went quiet for half a second, just enough for everyone to understand. My uncle coughed. My mom stared at her plate. I felt my face burn. After dinner, in the parking lot, I confronted her. "What is your problem?" I asked, my voice shaking. She shrugged, adjusting her coat. "I'm just being honest." "About what? You don't even know what I do." "I know enough. You quit school, you work from home, you have no benefits, no retirement plan. Emma, you're almost 32. And you're stuck." That word hit harder than anything else she'd ever said. Stuck. I laughed, but it came out brittle. "You have no idea." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean. I just think you should be realistic. Not everyone is meant to lead. Some people are better supporting." Supporting? I stared at her perfectly lined lips, her diamond earrings glinting under the streetlight. "You really think I failed?" she said, not hesitating. "Yes." That was the moment something inside me went cold. Not angry, not hurt, cold. 2 months later, I got an email that changed everything. Subject line, Enterprise Contract Inquiry. The sender, a regional retail chain expanding nationally, 37 stores, e-commerce overhaul, full rebrand. It was the biggest opportunity of my life. The kicker? Their parent company was a logistics partner of Lauren's firm. I didn't realize that first, not until the discovery call, when one of their executives mentioned they'd heard about us through a connection at Holt & Mercer. Holt & Mercer, Lauren's firm. I didn't react. I just smiled through the Zoom call, my heart pounding. By the end of negotiations, we signed a $1.2 million contract. I sat alone in my apartment after the DocuSign notification came through, staring at the screen. I didn't cry, I didn't celebrate. I just thought about Lauren's face. The opportunity to reveal everything came sooner than I expected. Lauren invited the family to her company's annual holiday gala, black tie, downtown hotel ballroom. She said she could get me in as a +1. I almost declined. Then she added, "It'll be good networking for you." I smiled into the phone. "Sure, I'll come." The night of the gala, I wore a midnight blue gown that I'd bought and never had an excuse to wear. I left my hair down, soft waves over my shoulders. I looked like someone who owned the room. Lauren barely glanced at me when we arrived. Inside, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and polished marble. Executives clustered in tight circles, laughing too loudly. Lauren introduced me to a few coworkers. "This is my sister, Emma. She does freelance marketing." Freelance. I opened my mouth to correct her. Then I stopped, because across the room I saw a familiar face from a recent board meeting. James Caldwell, CEO of the retail chain that had just signed with Larkin Vale. He was in deep conversation with a group near the stage, and next to him was Lauren's boss, Michael Trent. My pulse quickened. Lauren didn't notice. She was too busy telling someone about her promotion track. Then I heard it. "Emma?" I turned. James was walking towards me, smiling broadly. "Emma Lawson," he said, extending his hand. "Founder of Larkin Vale. I didn't know you were connected to Holt & Mercer." The word hung in the air. Founder. Lauren's smile froze. For a split second, no one moved. Michael Trent blinked. "Founder?" James laughed lightly. "Yes, the firm we just partnered with for our national expansion. She's leading the entire brand transition." I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Lauren turned to me slowly. "You're... what?" I met her eyes. "I run my own company," I said evenly. Silence. Michael looked impressed. "We've heard excellent things." James nodded. "Your strategy deck was one of the best I've seen in a decade." Lauren's hand tightened around her champagne glass. "But you said you were freelancing," she whispered. I tilted my head slightly. "You never asked." The rest of the night blurred into handshakes and business cards, executives asking for meetings, compliments, respect. Lauren stood beside me like a ghost. At one point, Michael pulled me aside. "I had no idea you were related," he said. "We've been looking to outsource more creative strategy. Maybe we should talk." I smiled. "I'd love that." Across the room, I saw Lauren watching me. Not angry, not embarrassed. Something else. Threatened. When we got into the Uber later, the silence was suffocating. She stared out the window. Finally, she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at the city lights sliding past. "You told everyone I failed," I said quietly. "Why would I give you the satisfaction of correcting you?" She flinched. "You didn't mean that." "You did," I cut in. "You meant every word." The car stopped at her apartment first. Before she got out, she turned to me. "This isn't over," she said softly. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And as she closed the door and walked towards her building, I realized something I hadn't expected. The gala hadn't been the victory, it had been the opening move. Because 2 weeks later, I got another call. this time from Michael Trent directly, and what he said next made my stomach drop. "Emma," he began carefully, "there's been an internal complication." And suddenly, I understood. Lauren wasn't done, not even close. Michael's voice didn't have the same smooth confidence it had at the gala. It was measured, cautious. "There's been an internal complication," he repeated. "It involves your sister." I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the skyline outside my apartment window. Snow was falling in thin, quiet sheets over Columbus. Everything looked clean from up here. "Okay," I said calmly. "What kind of complication?" A pause. "She's raised concerns about a potential conflict of interest." Of course she had. I let out a slow breath through my nose. "What kind of concerns?" "She implied," he continued carefully, "that Larkinvale may have gained access to proprietary insights through her position here, that perhaps some of the retail chain's logistics vulnerabilities were shared informally." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because it was insane. "She's accusing me of corporate espionage?" "I'm not saying that," he said quickly, "but the board is taking it seriously. They've requested documentation of your client acquisition timeline and strategy development process." My heart was beating hard now, but my voice stayed steady. "I have everything documented," I said. "Contracts, timestamps, archived emails, project management logs, every version of every deck." "I assumed you might," Michael replied, "but I need you to understand the optics. She's a senior operations manager here. If she's claiming confidential leakage..." "She's lying," I said flatly. Another pause. "Yes," he said quietly, "that possibility has crossed my mind." When the call ended, I sat there in silence. Lauren hadn't come at me emotionally. She'd come at me professionally. That meant she was scared, and scared people do reckless things. I opened my laptop and started pulling files, not because I was worried, but because I was meticulous. Every client onboarding form, every Slack export, every recorded Zoom pitch. I had built my company like someone who expected to be doubted, because I had been. 3 days later, I was sitting in a glass conference room at Holt & Mercer. Across from me sat Michael, 2 board members, legal counsel, and Lauren. She looked immaculate. Cream blazer, hair pulled tight, calm expression. If I didn't know her, I'd think she was confident. But I did know her. Her left thumb kept rubbing the edge of her folder. She only did that when she was nervous. The legal counsel began. "Miss Lawson, thank you for coming. We simply need clarification regarding how Larkinvale secured its contract with Caldwell Retail." I slid a thick binder across the table. "Timeline," I said. "Initial outreach began 18 months before my sister's team initiated any internal discussions with Caldwell. Here are the email threads, cold pitch decks, and recorded strategy sessions, timestamped." One of the board members flipped through the pages. Lauren didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead. Michael cleared his throat. "Lauren suggested that certain logistical restructuring proposals in your pitch mirrored internal projections here." I smiled slightly. "That's because I built those projections from public SEC filings in quarterly reports. They weren't internal. They were obvious." Lauren silently spoke. "You're saying you just guessed correctly?" "I'm saying I'm good at what I do." Her jaw tightened. One of the board members looked up. "These documents seem thorough." The legal counsel nodded slowly. "Very thorough." I leaned back. "If you'd like, I can also provide access to my company's project management system. Every task is date-stamped. We operate transparently." Silence filled the room. Then Michael said something that shifted the entire atmosphere. "Lauren, when did you first become aware of your sister's company size and revenue?" Her head snapped slightly toward him. I wasn't aware of specifics." "That's interesting, because you described her work performance as small-scale freelance projects in your initial memo." Heat crept up her neck. "That's what she told us." I didn't speak. Michael's eyes moved between us. "And you never verified?" She hesitated. "No." The board member closed the binder. "I don't see evidence of misconduct here," he said plainly. The legal counsel agreed. "In fact, this documentation is stronger than most vendor submissions we've reviewed." Lauren's breathing changed, subtle, faster. Michael folded his hands. "Thank you, Emma. We'll follow up formally, but I think this resolves the matter." The meeting ended with handshakes, except from Lauren. She walked out ahead of everyone. I followed her into the hallway. "Was it worth it?" I asked quietly. "You humiliated me. I tried to sabotage my company. You embarrassed me in front of my boss." "I didn't say a word," I said evenly. "James did." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "You could have told me, and you could have asked." For a second, I saw something raw flicker in her eyes. Not anger, fear. "You don't understand," she said. "My promotion review is next quarter. Do you know what it looks like when your little sister suddenly outpaces you, when executives start questioning why they didn't know?" "So this was about you," I said softly. "It's always about perception," she snapped. "In corporate America, perception is survival." There it was. She hadn't attacked me because she thought I failed. She attacked me because I didn't, and it made her feel small. "I never competed with you," I said. She laughed bitterly. "You didn't have to." That night, my phone buzzed. An email from Michael. Subject: formal resolution. The board had dismissed all allegations. They praised Larkinvale's documentation standards. They were expanding the outsourcing discussion. At the bottom, one line stood out. "Separately, we are conducting an internal review regarding inappropriate reporting." I stared at that sentence for a long time. I didn't want her fired, despite everything, but actions have weight. 2 weeks passed. Then I got another call. Not from Michael, from Lauren. Her voice sounded different. Small. "They're demoting me," she said without greeting. I stayed silent. "They said I exercised poor judgment, that I damaged a potential partnership. Do you know how long I worked for that promotion?" I swallowed. "I didn't ask them to do that." "I know," she whispered. "That's the worst part." There was a long pause. "I just needed to be ahead of you," she admitted quietly. "You were always underestimated, and I thought that meant I was better." Her words settled in the air between us. "You built something real," she continued, "and I didn't even see it." I leaned against my kitchen counter, remembering every Thanksgiving, every birthday toast. "You didn't want to see it," I said. Another pause. "Probably not." For the first time in years, there was no edge in her voice, just honesty. "I'm not your competition," I said softly. She laughed bitterly. "You didn't have to." That night, my phone buzzed. An email from Michael. Subject: formal resolution. The board had dismissed all allegations. They praised Larkinvale's documentation standards. They were expanding the outsourcing discussion. At the bottom, one line stood out. "Separately, we are conducting an internal review regarding inappropriate reporting." I stared at that sentence for a long time. I didn't want her fired, despite everything, but actions have weight. 2 weeks passed. Then I got another call. Not from Michael, from Lauren. Her voice sounded different. Small. "They're demoting me," she said without greeting. I stayed silent. "They said I exercised poor judgment, that I damaged a potential partnership. Do you know how long I worked for that promotion?" I swallowed. "I didn't ask them to do that." "I know," she whispered. "That's the worst part." There was a long pause. "I just needed to be ahead of you," she admitted quietly. "You were always underestimated, and I thought that meant I was better." Her words settled in the air between us. "You built something real," she continued, "and I didn't even see it." I leaned against my kitchen counter, remembering every Thanksgiving, every birthday toast. "You didn't want to see it," I said. Another pause. "Probably not." For the first time in years, there was no edge in her voice, just honesty. "I'm not your competition," I said softly. She laughed bitterly. "You didn't have to." That night, my phone buzzed. An email from Michael. Subject: formal resolution. The board had dismissed all allegations. They praised Larkinvale's documentation standards. They were expanding the outsourcing discussion. At the bottom, one line stood out. "Separately, we are conducting an internal review regarding inappropriate reporting." I stared at that sentence for a long time. I didn't want her fired, despite everything, but actions have weight. 2 weeks passed. Then I got another call. Not from Michael, from Lauren. Her voice sounded different. Small. "They're demoting me," she said without greeting. I stayed silent. "They said I exercised poor judgment, that I damaged a potential partnership. "Do you know how long I worked for that promotion?" I swallowed. "I didn't ask them to do that." "I know," she whispered. "That's the worst part." There was a long pause. "I just needed to be ahead of you," she admitted quietly. "You were always underestimated, and I thought that meant I was better." Her words settled in the air between us. "You built something real," she continued, "and I didn't even see it." I leaned against my kitchen counter, remembering every Thanksgiving, every birthday toast. "You didn't want to see it," I said. Another pause. "Probably not." For the first time in years, there was no edge in her voice, just honesty. "I'm not your competition," I said softly. She laughed bitterly. "You didn't have to." That night, my phone buzzed. An email from Michael. Subject: formal resolution. The board had dismissed all allegations. They praised Larkinvale's documentation standards. They were expanding the outsourcing discussion. At the bottom, one line stood out. "Separately, we are conducting an internal review regarding inappropriate reporting." I stared at that sentence for a long time. I didn't want her fired, despite everything, but actions
When
have weight.
James texted me
2
about the
weeks
acquisition, I didn't answer right away. I stood there on my mother's porch with Lauren beside me, the cold Ohio air pressing against my lungs, and I felt that same quiet stillness I'd felt the night the $1.2 million contract came through. Not excitement, not fear, a pivot point. Inside the house, I could hear dishes clinking, my mom laughing too loudly at something my uncle said, life going on like normal, but nothing was normal anymore. "Everything okay?" Lauren asked again. I slipped my phone into my coat pocket. "Yeah, just work." She gave a small nod, the kind people give when they know there's more but don't push. For once, she didn't try to minimize it. That alone felt strange. The board meeting with Caldwell Retail happened 3 weeks later in Chicago. Top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of room that makes you feel small on purpose. James sat at the head of the table. 2 board members, their CFO, legal counsel. They didn't waste time. "We're expanding aggressively," James said. "Your firm has been instrumental. We're prepared to offer an acquisition." He slid a folder across the polished table. I didn't open it immediately. "What kind of acquisition?" I asked. "Full buyout. You remain as creative director for a 3-year transition. Significant equity payout." The CFO leaned forward. 8 figures. 8. My throat tightened, but I kept my face neutral. They started talking numbers, growth projections, integration plans. My mind drifted for a moment, to that folding table in my first apartment, to eating ramen while learning SEO from YouTube videos, to Lauren calling my work cute. 8 figures. When the meeting ended, I walked along the Chicago River alone, wind sharp against my cheeks. I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking about control. If I sold, I'd win in a way no one could question, but I'd also give up something that was mine, built by me, named by me. That night, back in my hotel room, I called the one person I never expected to ask for input, Lauren. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, I got an offer," I said. Silence. Then, carefully, "What kind of offer?" "To sell." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you going to?" "I don't know." Her voice shifted, less corporate, more sister. "What do you want?" I almost laughed. 5 years ago, she would have told me what she thought I should want. Now she was asking. "I want to build something that can't be dismissed, even if I step away," I said quietly. She inhaled slowly. "Then don't sell it for validation." That hit harder than anything she'd said in years. "I'm not," I said. "I know, but just make sure." We stayed on the phone longer than we had in a long time, not fighting, not competing, just talking. A week later, I made my decision. I didn't sell. I negotiated instead. Strategic partnership, minority equity stake, massive capital infusion without surrendering control. When the contracts were signed, James shook my hand and said, "Founder stays founder." I smiled, because that word no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like truth. The announcement went public 2 months later. Business journals picked it up first, then LinkedIn exploded, then a regional news segment requested an interview. The headline read,
Local founder secures multi-million strategic partnership. Founder. My phone lit up for days. Investors, entrepreneurs, old classmates who'd barely spoken to me in years. And then family. My mom cried on the phone. My uncle posted the article on Facebook with a string of applause emojis. Lauren didn't text. She showed up at my new office, unannounced. She stood in the doorway while my team worked around us, the energy buzzing in the open space. "You're busy," she said. "Always." She stepped inside slowly, taking in the exposed brick, the glass conference room with Lark and Vale etched on it. "You did this," she said. "I did." She nodded. "I used to think success looked like a title," she admitted, "or a corner office. And now?" She looked at me directly. "Now I think it looks like this." There was no sarcasm, no edge, just acknowledgement. "You scared me," she continued. "When they called you founder that night, I realized I never actually knew you. I felt something loosen in my chest. You knew the version of me that made you comfortable," I said. She didn't argue. "Michael promoted me," she added quietly. "Different division, smaller team, but it's mine." "That's good," I said. "I stopped introducing myself as senior operations manager," she said with a faint smile. "Now I just say what I build." I looked at her for a long moment. Maybe we both needed to learn that lesson in our own ways. Months passed. Growth accelerated. We expanded into 2 more states. My calendar became a battlefield of meetings and strategy calls. But something else shifted too. At the next family gathering, there were no subtle jabs, no loaded toasts, just conversation. Lauren and I still weren't best friends. We weren't suddenly close, but we weren't enemies. One evening, long after most guests had left, we sat alone in my mom's quiet living room. "You know," she said softly, "when I told everyone you failed, I think I was afraid you wouldn't." I studied her. "That doesn't even make sense." "It does if you're me," she said. "I built my identity around being ahead. And now?" She shrugged slightly. "Now I'm trying to build something that doesn't require someone else to be behind." The honesty was almost uncomfortable, but real. A few weeks later, I stood on a stage at a Women in Business conference, spotlight warm against my skin, hundreds of faces in the dark. They introduced me as founder and CEO of Lark and Vale, no hesitation, no doubt. As I spoke about growth, risk, strategy, I caught a glimpse of someone near the back. Lauren. She wasn't in the VIP section, she wasn't networking, she was just listening. When the applause filled the room, I felt it, not as revenge, not as victory over her, but as a confirmation of the nights no one saw. After the event, she hugged me briefly. "I'm proud of you," she said. It was simple, unpolished, but it was the first time she'd ever said it, and it meant more than the 8-figure valuation. Later that night, I sat alone in my office, city lights stretching endlessly beyond the windows. I opened my laptop and pulled up the very first invoice I ever sent, $400. I smiled. People still ask me what it felt like when her boss called me founder. They expect me to say it felt like redemption or justice or triumph. But the truth? It felt like inevitable, because I had already known who I was long before anyone else said it out loud. And if you've been watching this story unfold, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, labeled as the one who failed, you already know that feeling too. Because sometimes the loudest victories aren't the ones you announce, they're the ones you build quietly, until the world has no choice but to say your name correctly. And trust me, this is not the last chapter.